Dear students, welcome to this lecture on the life and work of J J Rousseau. Throughout this lecture, we will discuss and deliberate upon his philosophy, including his concept of the state of nature and social contract theory, as well as the role of government, general will, education, and democracy. Additionally, we will explore his influence on other thinkers and criticism of theory. Join me as we explore the fascinating world of J J Rousseau and his impact on political philosophy. By the end of this lecture, you will have a comprehensive understanding of Rousseau's contribution to political philosophy through his conception of social contract. Let me begin by giving you an introduction about the life and work of J J Rousseau. Rousseau was born in Geneva, Switzerland in 1712. He is regarded as one of the key figures of Enlightenment, and his theories have had a significant influence on contemporary political theory. As a philosopher, writer, and composer, Rousseau's political philosophy revolved around the concept of social contract. This theory suggests that individuals relinquish certain rights and freedoms to the government in exchange for protection and security. Rousseau's ideas on the social contract have had a profound impact on the modern political thought. His belief that the government should serve the common good of the people rather than the interests of the ruling class has influenced the development of democratic societies around the world. Rousseau's first major work, Discourse on Inequality, was published in 1754. In this work, Rousseau argued that inequality is not natural, but is instead of the product of the society. He also argued that the only way to achieve true equality is to return to a state of nature. Rousseau's most famous work, The Social Contract, was published in 1762. In this particular work, Rousseau argued that the only legitimate form of government is based on the consent of the governed. He also argued that the government should be limited in its powers and the people should have the right to overthrow a government that does not represent their interests. Rousseau's other major works include Emily, Confessions, and Reveries of a Solitary Walker. In Emily, Rousseau outlined his educational philosophy. In Confessions, he wrote an intimate autobiography, and in the Reveries of a Solitary Walker, he reflected on his life and ideas. Rousseau's works such as The Social Contract and Emily have been widely studied and debated by scholars and politicians alike. His ideas on the importance of education and the role of the individual in society continue to shape our understanding of politics and human nature. His political philosophy was highly influential in the French Revolution and has continued to be debated and discussed ever since. Rousseau's most famous work of political philosophy is The Social Contract, which was published in 1762. In this work, Rousseau argues that the best form of government is a republic, in which people are sovereign and the government is ruled by the general will. The general will is not will of the majority, but rather the will of the people as a whole. It is the will that is in the best interests of all, even if it is not in the best interests of any one individual. He believed that the best form of government is one that protects individual freedom and promotes common good. Another well-known fact about Rousseau is that his ideas about government were radical for his time, and they have been influential in the development of democracy and human rights. His ideas have also been used to justify revolution and violence, and they have been criticized for being unrealistic and utopian. He was accused of being a radical and a threat to the established order. However, his ideas have also been highly influential. They have been used to justify both democracy and revolution. Rousseau's ideas about the individual and society are also important. He believes that the individual is naturally good and that society corrupts the individual. He argues that the best way to live is to live in a simple society close to nature. This was all about the introduction about Rousseau. Now let me come to Rousseau's influence on other political thinkers. Rousseau's ideas have had a profound influence on other thinkers, including Thomas Jefferson, John Locke, and Karl Marx. Jefferson was inspired by Rousseau's ideas about democracy and human rights, and he used these ideas in drafting the Declaration of Independence. Locke was influenced by Rousseau's ideas about the state of nature and the social contract, and he used these ideas in his own work on political philosophy. Karl Marx was influenced by Rousseau's ideas about inequality and the state, and he used these ideas in his own work on communism. The American revolutionaries were inspired by Rousseau's ideas about the importance of individual liberty and the right to overthrow a government that does not represent the people. The French revolutionaries were inspired by Rousseau's ideas about the importance of equality and the need for a social contract that protects the rights of people. And the philosophers of the 20th century, such as Jean-Paul Sartre and Simone de Beauvoir, were inspired by Rousseau's ideas about the importance of freedom and the need to create a society that's based on equality and justice. Let me talk about Rousseau and his state of nature. Like Hobbes and John Locke, Rousseau starts his political philosophy with the state of nature. Rousseau believed that the state of nature in which humans lived before the creation of society was a state of perfect freedom and equality. In the state of nature, humans were not subject to laws or rulers, and their natural rights were respected. The state of nature, according to Rousseau, was a state of peace and goodwill. His belief begins with the idea of the state of nature, a hypothetical scenario in which humans exist before the development of societies and governments. Rousseau believed that humans in their natural state were inherently good and moral, but that the corruption of society and civilization had caused them to become selfish and immoral. In the state of nature, individuals had complete freedom and equality, but also faced the constant threat of violence and insecurity. It's also represented the golden age. In this hypothetical condition in which humans, what he called the noble savage, lived before they formed societies. Humans were originally free and equal in the state of nature, but they had become corrupted through the institutions of marriage, family, and property. He proposed a new social contract in which the people would give up some of their freedom to create a society that was based on equality and justice. Human nature, according to Rousseau. Rousseau believed that humans are born free and equal and that they are unsurprisingly good. Rousseau argued that humans possess some natural qualities like self-love, pity, charity, sympathy, etc. Yet, these qualities were corrupted by society. Eventually, they lost freedom and all natural rights. The only way to achieve true freedom or regain the innocence of life of noble savage is to live in a society that's based on the consent of the governed. In his book, Discourse on inequality, Rousseau argues that there was a complete freedom and cooperation among the people in the state of nature. However, as humans began to form societies, they became increasingly dependent on each other. This dependence led to the development of inequality as some people became more powerful and wealthy than others. The rise of inequality has led people to understand the loss of innocence and natural liberty. Rousseau believed that the only way to overcome inequality is to create a society that's based on the consent of the governed. In such a society, the government would be limited in its powers and the people would have the right to participate in government. Now let me come to the social contract theory by Rousseau. For Rousseau, when equality disappears, man becomes a cunning brute and conditions of life change it for worse. Disorder and anarchy remain so rampant. So humans had no choice other than to agree through a contract. His most influential work, The Social Contract, outlines his theory of government which can be formed through a system of agreement. Here, Rousseau argues that the only legitimate form of government is based on the general will of the people. He believed that the people should have the power to make decisions collectively and the state should exist to serve the common good rather than the interests of the ruling elite. Rousseau's social contract theory posits that the individuals give up some of their natural rights and freedoms in exchange for protection and security provided by the government. Rousseau believed that the social contract was necessary for the common good and that it was the state's responsibility to promote the general will of the people. The general will referred to the common interest or the good of community as a whole, rather than the interests of individuals or groups. In a way, he assumes that the contract ensures equality among those who created the political society. Rousseau argues that the people enter into a social contract with each other to protect their natural rights. The social contract creates a government which is given the power to protect these rights. However, government is limited in its powers and it can only act in the best interests of the people. He also argues that the people have the right to overthrow a government that does not represent their interests. He believed that this right was necessary to ensure that the government would always be accountable to the people. Coming to another important section of Rousseau's political philosophy, which is about the humans as noble savage. Rousseau's concept of the noble savage is the idea that humans are naturally good, peace-loving and innocent creatures. A noble savage, according to Rousseau, is a person who lives in the state of nature, free from corrupting influence of society. Rousseau argued that the noble savage was a model for how humans could live in a state of freedom and equality. His concept of noble savage is significant because it challenges the idea that humans are inherently selfish and aggressive. Instead, Rousseau argued that the humans are naturally good and the society corrupts them. This idea has had a significant impact on modern theories of human nature and has contributed to the development of more optimistic view of human nature. The role of government. Rousseau believed that the state had a responsibility to promote common good and the general will. He argued that the government should be guided by general will and that the power of the government should be limited by the will of the people. In his view, the government should serve as a neutral arbiter that would protect the common good and ensure that the individual interests did not undermine the well-being of society as a whole. Rousseau believed that the purpose of government is to protect the natural rights of its citizens. The government must also ensure that the people can live in a peace and security. He rejected the idea that government should be ruled by a monarch or a small group of elites. He believed that the only legitimate government is based on the consent of the governed. This means that the people must have a say in how they are governed. He also believed that the government should be as small as possible. He argued that the more power the government has, the more likely it is to abuse that power. The best government, he believed, is one that governs least. Some of the important characteristics of his government are that the government should be based on the general will of the people. This is the idea that the government should only make laws and policies that are in the interest of the people as a whole. The government should be as small as possible. Rousseau believed that the more power the government has, the more likely it is to abuse that power. The government should be accountable to the people. The people should have the right to vote on the laws and policies, and they should have the right to remove the government from power if it is not serving their interests. Rousseau's ideas about government have had a profound impact on political thought. His work has been praised by some and criticized by others, but there is no doubt that he was one of the most important political thinkers of all time. The general will. The concept of general will is the most fertile idea in his political writings. In his book, The Social Contract, Rousseau argues that the general will is the only legitimate basis for political authority. The general will is a hypothetical entity that represents the common good of all citizens. It's not simply the sum of the individual wills, but rather a higher order of will that emerges from the collective deliberation of citizens. He believed that the general will was always good and just because it was based on the common good of all citizens. He argued that the individuals, on the other hand, were often motivated by self-interest, which could lead them to make decisions that were harmful to community as a whole. The general will is not a fixed or unchanging entity. It can change over time as the needs and interests of the community change. The general will is not always easy to discern. It can be obscured by individual self-interest and by the influence of special interests. The general will is not always obeyed. Even when it is clear what the general will is, individuals and groups may still choose to ignore it. The general will is a complex and controversial concept. Some critics have argued that it is impossible to know what the general will is and that it is therefore dangerous to give it any political power. Others have argued that the general will is simply a way of legitimizing the rule of majority and that it can be used to justify the oppression of minority groups. Despite these criticisms, the general will remains an important concept in political philosophy. It is a reminder that the purpose of government is to serve the common good and that individual rights must be balanced against the needs of a community as a whole. Now let us come to Rousseau's work on education. In his book, Emily, Rousseau outlined his educational philosophy. He argued that the children should be allowed to develop naturally and they should be taught to think for themselves. His ideas about education have been influential in the development of progressive education. Rousseau was a strong advocate for education and that he believed that the education should be based on nature. He argued that the children should be allowed to develop naturally and that they should not be forced to learn things that they are not interested in. He also believed that the education should be practical and that it should prepare children for life in society. Moreover, the purpose of education is to prepare children for a life of virtue and happiness. Rousseau believes that children should be allowed to develop naturally according to their own individual inclinations. He also believes that children should be taught to think for themselves and to resist the temptation to conform to expectations of others. His views on education were controversial in his own time, and they continue to be debated today. Some people argue that his ideas are too idealistic and they do not take into account the realities of the world. Others argue that his ideas are too radical and that they would lead to the breakdown of society. Mary Wollstonecraft was a 19th century writer and philosopher who was heavily influenced by Rousseau's ideas on education. In her book, A Vindication of Rights of Women, Wollstonecraft argued that women should be educated in the same way as men and that they should be given the same opportunities to pursue their own interests and talents. Wollstonecraft's criticism of Rousseau's views on education was based on her belief that women were just as capable as men of reason and virtue. She argued that Rousseau's belief that women were naturally inferior to men was based on prejudice and superstition. She also argued on Rousseau's view that women should be educated primarily for the purpose of marriage and motherhood was harmful to both women and society as a whole. Wollstonecraft's argument for education of women were radical for her time, but they have since become widely accepted. Today, it is generally accepted that women should have the same educational opportunities as men. However, Rousseau's ideas on education continue to be debated, and there is no one-size-fits-all answer to the question of how children should be raised. Rousseau's concept of democracy, another important contribution by Rousseau. Rousseau's social contract theory has important implications for democracy. He believed that democracy was the best form of government as it allowed people to express their will and participate in political process. Rousseau also believed that the social contract was the foundation of democracy as it provided the framework for relationship between the people and the government. Rousseau's concept of the general will has had a significant impact on the development of democratic societies. The idea that people should have the power to make decisions collectively has been central to the development of modern democracies, in which citizens have the right to vote and participate in political processes. Rousseau's political philosophy and its relevance in the contemporary times. Rousseau's political philosophy remains highly relevant and significant today. His ideas on the state of nature, the social contract, the general will, and the noble savage continue to influence contemporary political and social thought. His ideas about freedom, equality, and the common good are still relevant to our own political and social struggles. His work continues to be studied and debated by philosophers, political scientists, and activists. Rousseau's ideas are still relevant today. For example, Rousseau's ideas about freedom are relevant to the ongoing debate about the role of government in our lives. Rousseau believed that the government should be limited in its powers and that the people should have the right to overthrow a government that does not represent their interests. This is still a relevant debate today as we see governments around the world becoming increasingly powerful and intrusive. Rousseau believed that all people are born equal and that they should have equal rights and opportunities. This is still a relevant goal today as we see inequality growing both within and between countries. and Rousseau's ideas about common good are relevant to the challenges we face in the 21st century. Rousseau believed that the government should be based on the common good and the people should have a say in how they are governed. This is still a relevant goal today as we face challenges such as climate change, poverty and war. To conclude this lecture, J Rousseau was a complex and controversial figure, but there is no doubt that he was one of the most important thinkers of Enlightenment. His ideas about government, freedom and equality have had a profound impact on the modern political thought. His concept of social contract was a major contribution to the development of liberal theory, and his idea of general will was an important precursor to the development of socialist theory. Rousseau's ideas on politics continue to be debated and discussed today. They are valuable resources for anyone who wants to understand the foundations of modern democracy and the challenges it faces. So, dear students, with this, I conclude today's lecture. Hope to meet you again next time with a new topic. Goodbye.